Stanford University.
Hello, everyone, and good evening. My name is Amy Shapiro, and I am the Director of Programming and Engagement at the Anderson Collection. And it is my pleasure and privilege to welcome you here today to the Burt and Deedee McMurtry Lecture, artist Wendy Red Star in conversation with Karen Biestman. Yeah. Wendy Red Star's solo exhibition, American Progress, is currently on view at the Anderson Collection. We are in this beautiful space thanks to the partnership of Stanford Live and Bing Concert Hall and their incredible team who collaborated with Anderson Collection staff, led by Ileana Tejada, who's somewhere in here, to co-present this program tonight. We share our deep gratitude to the McMurtry family for providing the Anderson Collection with the opportunity to bring speakers as esteemed as Wendy Red Star to Stanford to engage personally and deeply with our students and our community. I also want, yes, there's a lot to clap about tonight. I also want to show our deep appreciation for all who made Wendy Red Star's exhibition at the Anderson possible. This was a true collaboration across the university. The American Studies program, the Billings Center for the American West, the Center for Comparative Studies in Race and Ethnicity, the Institute for Diversity in the Arts, museum members, the Harry W. and Mary Margaret Anderson Charitable Foundation, Epiphany Couch, Sargent Daughters Gallery, and of course, the amazing Wendy Red Star. Most notably, this exhibition was produced in collaboration with Stanford students. Students from across campus participated in deep research, image gathering, and helped to paint and produce what became a full-wall replica of a paint-by-number version of John Gass' iconic 1872 painting featuring Lady Columbia, titled American Progress. This exhibition brought students and the artists together, and it truly could not have happened without the commitment and time these students gave this project. So to those students who made American Progress become a reality, I thank you so very much. To Halima Ibrahim. There's a few, so you might want to hold on for that. Kaylee Knock, Lisa Lee, Linda Liu, Michelle Kai, Tira Blackwater, Eklund Hu, Anuhia Parker, Sadie Blancaflor, Chase Clavin, Anna Zhang, Hunter Taylor Black, Muki Kozikoglu, Crystal Liu, Sarah Panzer, Audrey Kearns, Smitty Matal, Jimena Sanchez Martinez, Marco Gonzalez, Mar Tenorio, and Renad Amul Jamal. It's been an absolute pleasure to have students be such a large part of this exhibition. And I know it was also very meaningful to Wendy as well. So when you walk into the exhibition American Progress at the Anderson, you are met with the beauty of the image of Wendy Red Star's great-great-grandmother staring at you from a quilted background. You are also met with a 10-foot-tall inflatable interpretation of Lady Columbia, a figure who has symbolized the ideas of manifest destiny and westward expansion in the 19th century, floating right above you. You can't ignore either figure. One has a quieter presence, while the other is loud, literally in sound, in size, and in caricature. Red Star's work is as serious and as playful as this juxtaposition sounds. She uses humor and satire to explore the complicated and traumatic history of pioneers moving west in this country in search of land and power, while displacing and killing large communities of Native Americans. Red Star also asks us to look at Stanford's own history and question where we currently stand and how we got here. There's also a strong sense of sovereignty and strength in this exhibition. From a map displaying the over 700 territories of federally and state-recognized tribes to the visual representation of tribal seals from across the country. It is a powerful message that challenges the traditional narratives often told of our country's history. Wendy Red Star was raised on the Apsáalooke Crow Reservation in Montana and currently lives and works in Portland, Oregon. Red Star has exhibited at venues including the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Brooklyn Art Museum, the Portland Art Museum, the Minneapolis Institute of Art, and many others that I edited out because it would be too long, with her approval, by the way. Her work is in the permanent collections of the MoMA, the Met, the Whitney, the Baltimore Museum of Art, the Williams College Museum of Art, the British Museum, and many others. In 2017, Red Star was awarded the Louis Comfort Tiffany Award, and in 2018, she received a Smithsonian Artist Research Fellowship. She holds a BFA from Montana State University Bozeman and an MFA in sculpture from UCLA. We are excited to be joined by Karen Biestman. Biestman is the Associate Dean and Director of the Native American Cultural Center on campus and teaches at the Center for the Study of Race and Ethnicity in the areas of federal Indian law, nation building, American Indian religious freedom, and peacemaking. Prior to 2011, she taught at UC Berkeley in the law school, American Studies, and Native American Studies. She also served as Director of Indian Education for the Environmental Protection Agency in San Francisco to develop a national curriculum on working effectively with tribal governments. Now you see why I have 4 pages here. The common thread in her professional roles is the unwavering commitment to promoting academic excellence and institutional support for Native students and creating intellectual forums for thoughtful discourse around critical issues impacting Native communities, their lands, cultures, and sovereignty. She received both her BA and JD from UC Berkeley. Following Wendy and Karen's conversation, they will welcome a brief Q&A. So please write your questions on the cards provided when you entered and pass them to the end of your row for collection by ushers towards the end of the conversation. Please be sure to silence your cell phones and refrain from photography and recording. The full program will be recorded and available on our website soon. And so without further ado, please join me in welcoming Wendy Red Star and Karen Biestman.
Awesome job, Amy. I always feel like that's the hardest part of doing these talks. But before we get started, we wanted to do a land acknowledgement. Is there anything you want to say before that plays? All right, let's do that.
Horshe Tuhi, Kanakrakat. Good day, my name is Charlene Nijme, and I'm the chairwoman for the Muwekma Ohlone tribe of the San Francisco Bay Area. Here with me today, I have Vice Chair Monica Arellano and former Councilwoman Gloria Aliano, and Muwekma youth Isabella Gomez, Georgiana Gomez, Lucas Arellano, and Gabriel Nijme. Today, we will be reading our land acknowledgement on behalf of the Muwekma Ohlone tribe. Thank you and welcome to our ancestral homeland.
Horshetuhi, Stanford University Tashu, Nuperote, Uyakish Warep, Aye Mani, Hiswe Warep, Butrun Tamien, Wolwolam, Nonwente Muwekma.
Aye Muwekma Uyakish, Verona Ban, Alameda County Tak. Ne Shahishu Stekne, Tuhi, Muwekma Ohlone tribe, San Francisco Bay Area Tak. Nepe Warep, Oyo Wetzel, Muwekma Wolwolam, as Verona Ban Tak. Suyakma.
Makintashu, Nupetita, Muwekmash, Wetel, Palo Alto Tak, Hemenia. Wayente at Oyo, Orto, Horshet Nepe Warep, Huyu, 1891.
Suyhanimu, Maknuma, Hemenia, Makin, Wayente, Ukshere, Hiti, Aye, Dashu, Irite, Stanford University Tak, Achokmamu, Muwekma.
Palo Alto Tak, Hemenia, Tahe, Tashu Mak Warep, Wolwolam, Mani Mak Heme, Mani Mak Ukshere, Mani Mak Tape. Tashu Muwekma Mak Isha, Mak Tuheste, Nesha Tuhi Rotenomo, Palo Alto tak Hemenia, Aye Bay Area tak. Aho.
Good evening. Warmest thanks to the Anderson Collection team, especially Amy Shapiro and Jason Linetsky for inviting a policy wonk like me, not an art expert, to join you. A special thanks also to Native student Tira Blackwater, who contributed to this exhibit amongst all those wonderful students as well, but also was a real wise thought partner in helping me think through some of these questions for Wendy. Thank you, Tira. And finally, heartfelt thanks to Wendy Red Star, who I feel like I've come to know and respect even further, for the opportunity to be in conversation with you about your work, but especially about your story, right? Because both of those things go a long way to indigenizing spaces, disciplines, ways of being, and ways of knowing at Stanford and beyond. So on behalf of the Stanford Native community especially, you honor all of us. Let's get started. I have a few questions for Wendy, and afterwards we're going to take a break and have some for you. But let's start with something that is near and dear to our hearts at Stanford. In the last 5 years, we've been integrating indigenous peacemaking methods and thinking on campus. One of the questions we always start with in a peacemaking circle is about values. So I'll pose it to you. What is one of your core personal values, and who gifted it to you?
That's such a great question. And I was really thinking about it, and I have to say integrity, but I also want to say fairness. But integrity, I think, comes from both of my parents, but especially my father. And his Crow name is Bakush Kawilida, and that means kind to everybody. And I just really love that name. But yeah, he would always say and do what he says.
Excellent, excellent. A favorite quote of mine is an Apache translation of "Wisdom sits in places." Tell us a little bit more about your values that you just mentioned, and your work, and how they're connected to place specifically, and a little bit more about your ancestral Crow homeland.
So I think a good place to start with sort of where I'm grounded and the values and where my father was raised, as well as myself, is the Crow Indian Reservation in southeastern Montana. And part of this exhibition, I had a wonderful group of Stanford students that I'm excited to meet. I hope I get to see a bunch of you tomorrow morning. But do research for me on tribal seals and gathering that information. I find them to be incredibly powerful and fascinating. And I just wanted to read a little bit about what our tribal seal means for the Apsáalooke Nation here. And I don't want to forget anything, so I am going to read a little bit here. So the Crow Cultural Commission designed the Crow tribal seal and flag, and the graphic illustrations were designed by Lawrence Big Hair. All these names, there was an amazing Big Hair that was a few years older than me, and she was a cross-country runner, and she was so good that Nike sponsored her, so. Clearly related to Lawrence. The emblem on the flag, which is the tribal seal, is encircled. This represents things. There is the sun and its rays. These represent the clans of the Crow Nation. So clans for crows are matrilineal, and since my mom is white, I go by my grandmother, my father's mom, and she's a Shkamya, which is pagan. So I am the Pagan clan. The three mountains depicted, they are on the present-day reservation, which are the Wolf Teeth, the Pryor, which is where I grew up, and the Bighorn Mountains. They are, it got cut off there. There's 2 rivers depicted, the Bighorn and the Little Bighorn River. There are a lot of presidents who come and fish the Bighorn. which is so funny because as crows, we didn't really care about fish, so it's interesting. It's a hot fishing spot. The teepee is white because it represents purity and goodness, and that is so true of our community. We love a white teepee, for sure. So if you come to our reservation, we have a cultural event called Crow Fair. It's known as the teepee capital of the world, and all the families set up lodges. So just beautiful white teepees. The teepee has our foundation structure of four base poles. And there's a great quote by one of our chiefs named Sits in the Middle of the Land. And he used the 4 poles that we use as a foundation to set the teepee up, and the rest of the poles go on that teepee to map out our land to the US government during, I can't remember which treaty, and very early treaty. But he mapped out 38.5 million acres by placing 1 pole on each of the major migration routes that we take throughout the season back then. And he said, my home is where my teepee sits. And I found that profoundly beautiful. Let me see here. So the poles, they represent the never-ending cycle of the seasons. There are 2 ventilator flaps, the 2 flaps, the V things that you see, and those represent our protectors. For the day, the coyote, and for the night, the owl. The teepee is anchored by stakes, which represent the badger, who digs his claws into the earth. And the 2 war bonnets represent the clan system. The Crow belief system has 4 major foundations represented. The clan system, the sweat lodge, which is represented there, the sacred tobacco bundle, which is our religion, and the pipe. The sweat lodge is a gift from the Creator since the beginning of the Crow. And the bundle represents our religion. And the pipe, when smoked, represents good thoughts and purity. And so that is what our tribal seal depicts. And it's really beautiful because I feel so grounded in it. And it's amazing to see other tribal nations and their seals and them representing similar things, similar aspects to their community.
Excellent. Let's talk some more about objects and how objects are connected to place, like the teepee, like the pole, etc. Stanford has a history of vigilant repatriation of Ohlone ancestral relatives and archaeological objects, but too many indigenous bodies and funerary objects and objects of cultural patrimony, artistic and literary creations, even ancestral records and genealogies that I know you care a lot about, are held in institutions, which is unsettling to Native communities and often feels like cultural theft. How does this unsettling influence your work, particularly as it's tied to genealogy, and how does it inspire you?
That's a big question. You know, I did a Smithsonian Artist Research Fellowship, and it was straddled between 2018 and 2019. And I worked with the National Museum of the American Indian, the National Anthropological Archives, and the Natural History Museum. And originally I pitched to them that I wanted to work on researching Crow delegations. But when I got to DC and I got to where they house all the material cultures, I sort of abandoned that concept and was like, I just have to see everything. And it's daunting and huge. But an amazing thing happened out of that trip. I kept running into my ancestors, like literally. And I was doing some genealogy work and looking at some photos, and I had heard the name Dreams the Truth. And so I was looking through Crow photos by a photographer named Fred Miller, who photographed my community in the early 1900s. And this image of this woman here that's on the screen popped up. And I read her name. Luckily, her name was accounted for, and it was Dreams the Truth, AKA Julia Bad Boy. And it's like, great. That's my great-great-grandmother, and I've never seen her before. So she really kind of came to me, and it was just super powerful, and I currently have made many projects involving this particular image of her. So I feel like she's been kind of this guide for me. And these are the two images. And this is a census record that I pulled. So her dad is bad boy. Her mother is runs among them. This was taken in 1885. Dreams the truth. She would have been 9 in 1885. Other bulls in between, and Crowwing. Crowwing is an uncle there in that family. So these are also kind of depicting the allotments in the households and who was in the house at that time period too. But she's got this amazing thick hair. She's wearing this sort of very typical Crow woman's necklace of where they have sort of a red bead and a white bead. And then she has an abalone necklace, which is my Crow name. It translates to abalone, or shiny shell, which is an abalone. So I found her, and she's been hanging out with me ever since. And Dust, but I actually had seen Dust before in a Fred Miller photo. So he's my great-great-grandfather. And these are lithographs that I produced at Crow Shadow Institute for the Arts, which is this wonderful printmaking residency on the Umatilla Indian Reservation in Oregon. And they bring in artists to work with a master printmaker, and also you get to meet the community and do workshops with the community there. So they were produced over like a week-long residency. And so this image is really interesting because he's an Indian police. And so I actually have a long history in my family of Indian police and tribal game wardens, including my father and grandfather. But he and Julia had a child together. Oh, this is Dust. So the census record, so he's adopted in this family. We have a whole unique thing about adopting kids. So that was very common for family members to take in different children. So in his adopted family, the father's name is Sugar. This is great. And the wife's name is Strikes Plenty Man. Now that's badass. Yeah, so great. And then there's a grandson, Bird, grandson 9 years old, and died in 1899. And first husband of Nellie Blaine. Yeah, so there's just all this amazing information, and there's so many descendants that like I went to school with and stuff like that. And he's got great earrings. And this is their son, William Dust, or Bill Dust. And he looks so much like my dad and my Uncle Kevin. It's like kind of uncanny, his profile. And he's wearing the most amazing, like, they call it capote jacket, is that what they say? And he's wearing a Nez Perce loop necklace. And so my dad grew up with him, and he would wake up in the morning, go to his Grandpa Bill's house and water his horses. That was his job in the morning. And he said Bill just dressed so immaculate. He always did his hair in the traditional Crow style with the little tiny braids and the 3 other braids, and he wore like cuffs on his arm, and he just looked really sharp. And another thing my dad said, he just had like bottles of iced tea everywhere. So, but he was a farmer, and he would sell his produce and stuff like that, and he was also big into racehorses, so he would race horses. And so this is actually his household in the 1930s. William Dust, and he wasn't married to her, but he had a child with Musette Brightwings, so that would be my grandmother's mother. And then these kids here, Annabelle, Isabel Dust, Edna Dust, Martha Dust, I'm missing Clive Dust in there, and Olive Dust are from another Brightwings woman. But Clive Dust, I actually have his Crow name now, and it means always creative. So anyway, so here it is. So Dreams the Truth, Dust, Bill Dust, his crow name is Sings in the Camp. And my grandma at the very bottom, Amy Brightwing's Red Star. So, and she was married to Wallace Red Star Sr., who is my grandpa, and then their dad, that's my dad. Their son is Wallace Red Star Jr. This is my father. Kind to everybody. Well, brings me to this piece, which is really for my daughter. I really want to give her a legacy and her genealogy that she can always point to, and no one can take that away from her. So she's in the bottom, and her crow name is Sandhill Crane Woman, Abitbia. And then my father, myself, and my grandma. She's about the same age as B in this picture, which would have been like 9 or something.
What a fabulous genealogical journey and series of discoveries that you translate into this fabulous work. Thank you.
But I wanted to say, because I rambled on there, but finding these in the archives and being in Washington, D.C., I actually found like a 4th great-grandfather named Greenskin that none of my family had heard of, and the museum actually holds 8 of his medicine bundles.
Wow.
There's something so strange going, and I feel like every Native person should go to the museum and demand that you see your stuff. They hold our cultural materials. There's something so strange to like have to ask permission to be like, can I see it? And then they have these sort of protocols. Well, this is maybe a restricted thing, so you might have to go ask somebody else if you can see your own cultural materials. So I really struggle with that, and I actually had sort of an incident, and I won't name the institution, but they sort of told me like I couldn't use like a parfleche design, which are these utilitarian cases that we would take things, carry things in, like dried meat or clothes, you name it. But they have these beautiful painted designs from the different communities. And finally, there was like some emails being passed back and forth, angry ones. Oh. And finally, we finally met face to face, and the collections manager said, well, it's just so hard because we have so many different Native community stuff here, and they all are wanting different protocols and things like that. And I thought, are you kidding me? You're going to complain to me of the burden of trying to reconcile how to give access to these communities. Well, that's the problem that you took on. So we have a long ways to go, but what I think is we all need to go and see our cultural material. Right? It's there. If there are Native students here, Native people, you have stuff in these institutions, and you need to see them.
Very true. In fact, there's a history of appropriation of Native objects, of Native bodies, of Native stories, and there was somewhat of a revelation with the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act that started to change the way institutions operated, but there's still an imbalance in the burden of proof. It's still on the Native people to prove that we're related to these things. And it's not about ownership, it's that there's a relationship there, and there's an obligation to caretake in a proper context, et cetera. So despite some legal progress we've made, there's still there's still a burden, and the burden is on Native communities and allies. Stanford is on the front line of being a good ally in that, but I honor the recognition that there's still a lot of work to do. I'm also inspired by the names of your family members. Chippewa author and activist Gerald Visner says, names and words have power in tribal societies, and sometimes in the Western world, we've oversold them like cheap detergents, right? Because names have meaning. Gerald Visner was also Stanford's first distinguished visitor for the Haas Center for Public Service in 2020. And one of his other legacies is coining the word survivance. When I have a legacy. I hope I can say I invented words. Well, he invented a lot of them. Survivance translates generally to imaginative survival through wit and grit and humor and grace and a little bit of chance, right? It resists genocide. It resists the idea of colonization. It resists framing natives as victims, right? So I'm curious, now as we transition to the work you did around American Progress, how does your choice of John Gast's 1872 painting, American Progress, resonate with this concept of indigenous survivance? And maybe you could start with telling us a little bit about what was your introduction or reaction to this piece? I remember you telling this story, and I thought, that was an impactful moment for you as an artist, right? What was your introduction to the story? And then lastly, I'll come back if you forget, how did the students' paint by number piece illuminate or blur those storylines? So,
great question, and you'll probably have to remind me. So I originally saw this at Montana State University in Bozeman, which is where I went to undergrad, and I was taking an intro to art history. And the class was a 9 a.m. class. There was this giant book that you had to carry with you. And I just remember being really woken up when this popped up on the screen. And it was about this size, so it was huge. The things that stood out to me is that the art history professor only sort of talked about the formal qualities. So it was sort of like wanting to know actually the political meanings that were happening here. And then it's just such a powerful, disruptive image that I think it's stayed with me this entire time until this exhibition. And so when Amy approached me to do the exhibition, and I started learning the history of Leland Stanford and him funding the railroad, this painting popped up in my brain. And so this was sort of the baseline for the exhibition. Basically, I wanted to sort of pull things apart from it that then I could sort of tackle and analyze and work with. So it started with this image. And what I found was it's actually a really tiny image. And it's at the Autry. It's collected at the Autry. And it was used for like a pamphlet promoting going west. And yeah, so I just sort of started with the painting. And I'm going to go to this next slide. And immediately I was like, well, I kind of want to make this painting, or how can I not necessarily redo, but like figure out a way to engage with it. And I thought about, well, I can't paint at all, but I wonder if I could turn this into a paint by number. So of course I was able to find a company that turned it into a paint by number. So I was waiting in my studio for this to come. I had no idea what they were gonna do, how it was gonna look. And it came to me, it came from China. So I was like, this is American Progress, where you can like make a master painting and get it from China. And so, yeah, it came and it was so complex. I think there were over 30 different colors. And speaking with Amy, I was like, oh my gosh, this would be incredible to have the students at Stanford and even the staff to help paint this, because this manifests destiny going west. We're here, we're in the West, we're in California. The whole sort of motivation of what's happening in this painting. And to have a lot of students of color also recreating this painting. So here's some of the process. And then this is their beautiful masterwork. It's amazing. And the sort of surprising elements was that it really became sort of murky and muddled, and like the train that you could see so clearly, you can't really see. Her telegraph line is gone. She almost kind of dissipates into the clouds even more. You don't really see the Native people, and I thought this really works well because it's not clear-cut, it's not black and white, it's complicated. And then I wanted it to be the size that I remember seeing it when I was in that art history class.
Fascinating. Can we talk some more a little bit about Lady Columbia?
Yes.
You mentioned that the Crow tribe and many tribal societies similarly are matrilineal or matrilocal, or what we sometimes call women rights societies. I tell my husband that means I'm always right. We're still working on that one. But women have always been knowledge and culture keepers in Native communities. So this is juxtaposed with a heavily male-gendered Western history and institutions, right? Which makes this enlarged inflatable that we're going to see in a moment. Hopefully you have seen this in the exhibit, Lady Columbia, all the more provocative, right? What does she tell us about history and gender in your mind?
So I just saw this show, was it yesterday? I just blew it. And I have not seen my work in person, my new work in person, since the start of 2020, yeah, oh my gosh.
Wow.
So I'm still very much unpacking my experience. So Lady Columbia, wow.
There she is.
So interesting because she's, when I walked in, she is doing what she has done in the painting, which is being a disruptor. Like she's like awkward and noisy and sort of like this eyesore. And when you're walking around the museum, even upstairs, and you catch a glimpse of her, you're sort of disrupted from the other works and things like that. But I was just sort of fascinated. I didn't really know anything about Lady Columbia and the history, the personification of the United States, and the fact that she's named after Christopher Columbus, and that the early depictions were more Native women. They didn't use women as the term. So she looked more Native. And then sort of as the US got more and more developed, those settlers, like, we don't want to see or be reminded of Native people. So that was sort of interesting too. And all the Columbias, like Columbia University is named after her, the District of Columbia. And then she sort of got pushed off of her pedestal by Lady Liberty. So I don't know, if there's a whole entire fascinating history of that. And also sort of, yeah, I'm still thinking of, what were your thoughts when you saw, encountered?
My first reaction was also a little bit of disruption because of the scale of her and the fact that that's the first thing you see, right? And the idea that this robe was floating down, but her features are kind of nondescript. Her skin color was very intentional, I thought, to suggest some sort of a level of purity. I was interested in which direction she was focused and if that was intentional. And then it just was an invitation to further deconstruct that when we went through the rest of it. But it was clearly kind of a startling image to begin something with, right?
Yeah.
But again, I saw it as an invitation to unpack what was to be seen throughout. So I'm not sure if that's what you intended, but it was a fascinating visual.
I think so, and I think she is pointing west, right, Jason? She is pointing west. And she sort of, I kind of also wanted to feel what the Native people were feeling in the painting. So I sort of wanted to, and I don't like it. I don't like it. She is definitely creepy, for sure. But I definitely think she needs to go on a full tour. So she needs to go to the Smithsonian, you name it.
Well, it's clear she also presides over this landscape.
Yes.
She dominates the image of the landscape. And an important part of that landscape in the original painting that sort of got blurred a little bit in the paint by numbers was the railroad.
Yes.
Right? And so I want to talk a little bit about railroads because they're centered in your own tribal experience. You talked about seeing a railroad, you know, in your father's ranch and in your own experience. But railroads also figure really prominently in Stanford's own history, indeed our founding, which you mentioned before. And you've invited us to interrogate that a little bit, right? To revisit our own institutional history, including the carving on the final gold railroad spike, "You are without relatives," right? You are without relatives. Is there room in this conversation for acknowledgement and healing? And I'm just wondering on a larger scale if you think art can promote truth and reconciliation. Not unlike the movement, for example, many of us know about with healing intergenerational trauma associated with Indian boarding schools, et cetera. So is there room for acknowledgement and healing in this kind of an exhibit? And can art promote truth and reconciliation?
I very much think so. I definitely think art is at the forefront and definitely a bridge, a way for people to engage and maybe some softer entry points into it as well. So I definitely think that for sure. What was the other part of your question? I can't, because Leland's staring at me and it's like pretty intense.
Is there room for acknowledgement and healing, and can art promote truth and reconciliation?
Yeah, I think so. It was really fascinating to dig into the history of Leland Stanford and their son, who died as a teenager, but was also collecting artifacts and things like that, which a lot of those are in the canter. And of course, the poisoning of Mrs. Stanford.
Jane Stanford.
There's some hot gossip here at this university, for sure. But yeah, and then to learn, these are the 4 big backers of the railroad to the west. And it dawned on me, oh, I have artwork in the Crocker Museum, and I really love Huntington Gardens. And then, is that Hopkins? So it's just sort of wild to, associate these names with sort of this history as well. And the whole Golden Spike ceremony that Leland participated in, and the fact that this is one of the spikes. And I'm not clear if it's if it's an original or a replica of it, but what really struck me was that there's sort of this whole photo op, and there's champagne, and I think primarily it's only white people depicted in this, so it doesn't depict the laborers, the Chinese workers, and the fact that they pretended to drill in this last ceremonial spike, which has all of the backers' names, and I think you can see Leland Stanford's name there. And I was just thinking about the total destruction and the total almost eradication of the buffalo, over 60 million, almost totally obliterated, not to mention Native people and all the people of color who were used for making the railroad happen. And this photo always sort of gets me, because it's just a mountain of buffalo skulls that would be shipped on the train back to, I think this is back east, I wish I remember. And then these were sort of ground down and used for various things. But when I was reading the history of the buffalo, there were so many buffalo that the way that they would count them would be in days. So like if you were in a place and they would say how many buffalo, they would be like, well, it took 3 days for them to pass. So you can't even imagine how monumental that would have been.
Size of the herds, yeah. It's haunting.
So that inspired me to create this piece, thinking about the buffalo and also, using the buffalo sort of as a symbol of a way of life, a landscape, animals and people that have basically been totally disrupted. And so my golden spike actually says, "You are without relatives," which is the historic insult as a crow. Like, that's the worst thing you could say to a crow. And when I talk to my dad, it sort of translates to, you have a lot of ghosts in your life. And basically the sentiment of that is that you don't have anyone to account for you. You don't have a community. No one can speak for you. And that's exactly sort of what I feel like capitalism is. It's individual. That is what I decided to put on the spike.
Great. Did you want to talk some more about that?
Yeah.
Before you go in, can I make a quick announcement? In about 5 minutes, we're going to open this up to audience questions and answers. So if you wouldn't mind passing any questions to an aisle, both aisles, I think there'll be students who are collecting them. So we're going to finish here in about 5 minutes and then want to hear from you. So please.
Okay. Yes. So I wanted to, in looking at buffalo, I wanted to find depictions of buffalo around that time period. So George Catlin was an artist in the mid-1800s and actually traveled to Crow territory. I feel like he did like 7 trips. Don't quote me on that. But in his paintings, he depicted wounded buffalo, and I found them really fascinating. There were a lot of different depictions of wounded buffalo. So there's 2 of his wounded buffalo, and then I was like, well, I want to find ledger drawings the same time period as George Catlin by native artists, and these are 2 Lakota. One's name is Ja, and the other one's Black Hawk, and their depictions of buffalo. And sort of what I found is that they're completely different. Like in all the native depictions, even if the buffaloes are wounded, they sort of seem very celebrated and happy. And I just like a whole perspective of sort of honoring the buffalo and really relying on the buffalo versus Catlin's experience of just like, really no connection to them.
And what a lot of people don't realize is that buffalo were subsistence, yes, but much more. They figure prominently in many Plains tribes' creation accounts. Many of them see the buffalo as an older brother, as a protector, and so there were teachings about avoiding overhunting or overkilling because there's a reciprocal relationship with the buffalo. So the loss of the buffalo wasn't just a subsistence food group. It was a part of your core identity. And so that haunting image, really is a profound loss that Native people are still reclaiming because the stories haven't gone. The experience is being reclaimed. So thank you for that.
I have also just, too, like the environment.
Yep.
They really shaped the environment and the whole ecological system, too. So that completely changed once they were gone.
And especially with the cattle.
Yes.
Which changed the landscape, too.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I have one last question I'd like to ask before we turn it over to our wonderful audience. The author Michael Doris, who actually started Dartmouth's Native Studies program, once described the dominant narrative of indigenous people as Indians in aspic, the idea that we're in a suspended or static reality. And it reflects this persistent narrative to trap all of us in 19th century homogeneous constructs. So tell us why this map that you created, this U.S. map of white flags marking state and federally recognized tribes, and that loop of diverse tribal seals, like the one that you shared with us about the crow, disrupts that, right? How does that Indians in aspect trapped in the 19th century narrative get disrupted by this map and by these flags? And why is telling this story visually so important now?
Mm-hmm. You know, I think this map kind of came about in a few different ways, but in speaking to your question, like as an artist and traveling and meeting people, sometimes I'm the first Native person they've ever met. Actually, it happens a lot. And then they'll usually say, yeah, I don't know any Native people. And I think, well, give me like a half an hour and I can find probably a bunch of Native people in this city, you know. And so for me, it was just like really a question of like presence. And so I really wanted to see that. So this map here is just only depicting the federally recognized tribes and reservations in the states. So it's not including the state recognized or tribes that aren't recognized by either the state or the government. And I wanted to actually see that for myself, a representation of where we are now. I know there's a lot of maps, including like with the land acknowledgement that are saying like we are on this territory, but this is actually the reality of our situation now, where reservations are and state-recognized communities, and this is what happened. And I just want to give a huge shout-out to Mark, who installed the show incredibly and drilled all of these flags into here. It's such a powerful work, and what I found myself doing was like, Texas? Like, what? There's only 3? I'm thinking about the Kiowa, and then, oh yeah, they went to Oklahoma. So when you look at Oklahoma, you see all the flags there. And then also I'm like, East Coast, I was like thinking like nobody was gonna be there. And you know, so these were things that even for me, I really just needed to see, and this map does such an amazing job. And then like Manifest Destiny, you know, Lady Columbia, like look at everything sort of being pushed over to the west. Alaska blows my mind. Like you can't even see Alaska. Wyoming, like, what's happening in Wyoming? So I just want to like sit there, and then of course you've got the states that don't have any representation, and yeah, so it just poses so many interesting thoughts for me, dots that I want to connect.
It's also a contradiction because there are over 564 federally recognized tribes in this country, including 220-something Alaska Native villages, but many of them are landless or have very small reservations. And you look at that map of California, there's over 102 federally recognized tribes in California, but the land base is really tiny because of the dispossession. So it's important to note sovereignty visually in this way, that we are still here.
Yes.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. So, yeah, you can find Native people, for sure. I mean, it's just like I don't know, it's one of my favorite pieces so far. Sorry, Lady Columbia.
Yeah, it's really compelling. And the seals, the thought behind the seals,
how
does that keep, why is that important to show now?
So, yeah, so the seals is another important aspect, and with the students compiling that information. And what I found is like, what came about was like, oh, I want a space on the internet where you could just go and you could find all the tribal seals. Right now, you have to poke around and go specifically to each tribal nation. And so we're working on, right now in the exhibition, there's projections of, I can't remember how many we have compiled that project. So there's moments where you can see several tribal seals. But the hope is that the students will continue to work and archive these tribal seals in this Google document that we have, and we'll include more. But eventually, my desire and my hope is that we actually create that space on the internet where people can go and learn the information about each of these tribal seals. And it's just important. Just me explaining the crow seal just tells you so much about what is important for us in our community.
And it's a visual reminder of survivance, which is what we come full circle to. Yeah.
Yes.
Wonderful. So are there questions I can ask in our final few minutes? I don't want to dominate the whole conversation. Okay? Okay. What is the significance of the Florentine border on the buffalo artworks?
Yeah, so I was really thinking a lot about what, like, for instance, my great-great-grandma and the dress that she was wearing, and how a lot of sort of the shirts and dresses were made out of flour sacks. And so it was sort of kind of a nod to grounding them sort of in that aesthetic.
Wonderful, okay. My grandmother made quilts out of them, the same thing with flour sacks, right? So, okay. Another construction question. How did you make the Columbia sculpture?
Well, we used a company called, I think, Larger Than Life, right? Larger Than Life. And my gallery actually helped me find them, and they're based in San Diego, and they were amazing to work with because I sheepishly was like, hey, I've got this weird idea. Can you, and showed them the painting, can you make this into a 10-foot inflatable? And they were so chill. They're like, oh yeah, no problem. And then later on, I found out that they actually do all the inflatables for this artist named Paul McCarthy. I was like, no wonder why, if you guys know who that is, like, it's even more outrageous stuff. So mine was like nothing compared to some of the weird stuff that they did. But yeah, so it was sort of a back and forth, and also kind of another fun like surprise for me, like the paint by number, not really knowing what I was going to be getting, because that was sort of left up to their creativity as well. So that was.
You didn't give them dimensions or?
I gave them like the size that I was aiming for. I really wanted something like a Macy Day parade size, but don't quite have
parade,
that funding. But yeah, so I gave them that, and then some of the things that I definitely wanted, like the star on her forehead and the book, things like that. And then the rest was just sort of this amazing surprise.
But not her features.
Yeah, I was like, if you could do it. I had no idea what they were capable of, but yeah, they did a good job. And she came in like a case that was apparently this big. She travels well, like.
What happens to her after Stanford?
Like I said, she's got to go on a whole tour. Maybe she'll go back east.
That's great, okay. Here's another big question, a deep question. What should museums do with Indian artifacts?
So, the problem is that, number one, they need to go back. I mean, they do need to go back to the communities. The issue is that the communities don't have the facilities. And so, since that's going to take some time, what they need to do is just allow complete access to tribal members. If a tribal member is interested enough to reach out, that institution shouldn't be shutting them down or telling them to go to a cultural committee and the politics of the tribal communities themselves, and so that's what I'm really advocating for. Full access. Let us touch them and let us be inspired and make whatever art or write about them. We need total access. And I think when I was talking to you and I said permission, And you were like, yeah, that's even weird, that word, permission. Because it does, it feels weird to like, can I please see this picture, or can I use this picture of my great-great-grandma?
Right.
And having to fucking ask them, excuse my language, but it's like, it's not right.
Right. You know, this also screams out for more young people to continue to do this work, for more young people to move into things like museum studies and to management of facilities like this. One of the things that's really exciting that I'm seeing, and I hope that you're seeing this in your work as well, is that some tribes who've got some liquidity, sometimes from casinos, some from other things, are actually creating their own museums, right? And I'm, for example, the vice chair of the board of the California Indian Museum and Cultural Center. And when you have Native folks managing museums, the policies are quite different, right? And that doesn't mean that only Natives can do the right thing, but it starts to shift the narrative about the field, the discipline, how we think about objects, how we think about art, whose voices are represented. And it disrupts that binary of property, right?
Yes.
And I think the property thing is what really troubled you, the boundaries between owning something and who has rights to it. That's really grounded in a Western construct that's not at all tribal. Yeah. So, thank you for that. Any other questions that we can pose to Wendy? And also, feel free to raise your hand and speak up if you'd like that.
A lot of your works are very large, and you like to scale up objects. Is your studio large?
I actually just this year, the years are all like blending together. So last year, got a studio space for the first time since graduate school, since 2006. I did all my work from home. So that's been awesome, and it's 600 square feet, so it's big for me, but it's not huge. But no, I think right now it's been a really fun moment in my practice where I'm doing a lot of collaboration. With this show, there was so much collaboration with the Anderson and working with them to figure out and create these artworks. And I love this way of working. I want to continue to work this way. So yeah, so by sort of utilizing that collaboration, I was able to pull off some of these incredible pieces. Yeah, I really love this sort of collaborative aspect. And the reason why I'm based in Portland is because there's amazing food there and great waterfalls. and actually, I have an ex-husband and a 14-year-old daughter, so I'm sort of stuck there for a little bit. Yeah. I think because I really want to whoever encounters to work to really contend with it, and I think it does really kind of harken back to my first experience with seeing American progress, and it loomed really large to me. So that's sort of wanting the audience to sort of live within that landscape, and also encounter this importance of the shifting and the genocide of the buffalo and community in landscape. So that's why it was important to utilize those different scales.
Can you comment on any ideas you might have or examples of art being used as a medium for intergenerational healing needed from the boarding schools?
I don't know, that's like, I feel like there are so many amazing Native artists, First Nations artists that are doing important work. And I feel like even just like me having an opportunity to have an exhibition like this is in a way sort of helping to heal that intergenerational trauma. I mean, yeah, I feel like that's the one thing in this exhibition. I mean, sort of the undercurrent is the intergenerational trauma that's happening. But all I can say is there's some amazing Native artists who are really tackling these topics, and just to support them, give them exhibitions, include them in the conversation. But yeah.
If there's none other question, I have one last burning question.
Oh.
Was that somebody with a hand said, oh? Oh, go ahead.
It's kind of hard to articulate, but you mentioned that the painting in American progress obviously had a huge impact on you. And I know it's, for many people, myself included, very controversial in how it depicts the concept of manifesticity. And I'm just kind of wondering, how was it like to recreate parts of it, even in somewhat satire or somewhat childish form of a paper effort, and just when it's something that's that meaningful?
I feel like I was in like a wrestling match with it, and yeah, literally grappling with it, trying to understand it, trying to pull it apart. And I'm still doing that. Like, I'm still unpacking my experience of this work in person. A lot of parts of this exhibition, I was talking to Amy and saying it was like different ingredients that we then made sort of this soup. But I didn't know if this soup was going to come together, if it was even going to taste good, because there's some wild elements. But yeah, I think for me it was actually kind of therapeutic to like be able to finally have that opportunity to say or feel what I wanted about this piece that I wasn't able to, really articulate when I was a freshman, undergrad.
Great, thank you. I think we're just about at time. We are, so I wanted to give Wendy the last word if you had any final thoughts about our time together and what you wanted to share in these moments.
I just want to express my deep appreciation to the Anderson, to all of the staff, to Amy for our years-long conversation, and just to all the students. I've learned so much. It's been an incredible experience for me, and I would really love to kind of continue on this path of collaboration. So yeah, I just want to leave it with that, with my deep gratitude, and thank you so much.
Wonderful. Please join me in thanking Wendy Red Star, everyone.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.